What up everyone, Tyler here, welcome back to another video. I'm a little congested, sorry I'm getting over a sinus infection, but I did want to get this video out because I've had a few calls and conversations and seen a few comments about people asking about my different study routines and habits. So I wanted to use this video to just give a little update on where I am in my process because it's been going on for over almost a year now. And then also just give you the lowdown on all the resources I used, how much it costs, time, and there's even going to be a Google Doc that I'll link below that will have, you know, my favorite numbers, the number 7. So it'll have my 7 tips and things that I learned while studying for the LSAT. And hopefully they'll be broad enough to work with any LSAT. But yeah, let's get into it and hopefully this will be a helpful video. Okay, so to start, I wanted to go over where I'm at in my admissions journey right now, or law school journey. So I started studying last August, which is when I kind of decided that I wanted to go to law school. And if you want to watch that video and my reasoning behind it, I'll link it up. So I studied for about 4 months, took my first LSAT in November. It didn't go as well as I wanted if you saw my score reactions. So I retook in January, which went pretty well. And sorry, that sinus infection. It went pretty well enough for me to apply. So I applied to honestly around 20 schools because I thought it would be helpful in, you know, this crazy year of COVID, and there was a lot of people unemployed, so there was more people applying and all that type of stuff. So I applied to 20 schools. I got waitlisted at over half of them and accepted into 3. And the 3 I was accepted into, I was super excited about, but ultimately due to scholarship and just having to relocate and all that type of stuff, it didn't make sense. And I applied in February this year, so that usually isn't super late, but just with the increase in applicants, it definitely wasn't early. So, you know, like I had no interviews, I had no anything. It was just apply and get waitlisted essentially. It was fine, you know, it is what it is. But because of that, I ultimately decided I was going to reapply earlier, and I wasn't sure if I was just going to update my resume or retake the LSAT. But then Emory, if you've seen my score reaction video, I mentioned Emory paid for me to take my 3rd LSAT, and so since it was the June LSAT and the last 3 section flex, which was the format I'd been studying for, I figured I'd just go for it, and I ended up getting a 173 on that test, so super proud of that score. But ultimately my plan now is to reapply in this upcoming cycle with a new score. I'll update my resumes, tweak my personal statement, things like that, reach out to my recommenders again. Ultimately that's where I'm at now. I spent a bunch of money on apps. I'm gonna reapply. Now I want to get into the things I learned while studying for the LSAT, and so we're gonna number those off 1 to 7. And let's just get into it. All right, we're actually going to start with an overview of all the resources I used. Like I said, there's a doc link down below. It has links to the pages of all the resources I used, how much it usually costs, and how much I paid for them. I started off with the Kaplan course, so I bought that on sale. I think there was like some sort of start studying for LSAT in August sale, so maybe that's going on right now, but it cost me about $1,000 for a twice-a-week course for, I believe it was a month. 2 weeks or 3 weeks into that, started getting really stressed, like it wasn't working for me, and bought the Power Score books just so I could get a different perspective, mostly on logical reasoning. Then there's also the Law Hub subscription, which is $200. What up everyone, Tyler from the future here. So I misspoke on this. Apparently it's only $100, I think, or $99, whatever. So yeah, just keep that in mind. It's not $200. My bad. And that is honestly probably the most important. That gives you access to all the previously released LSATs. So when you're doing all of your practice tests or doing your own drills, you can retake them as many times as you want, and you have access to old tests, new tests. So, you know, most people earlier on in the process take the older ones, and then as they get closer to their test date, take the more updated versions because it's closer to what the test is today. Finally, I before my 3rd LSAT, because I wasn't paying for the test, I did hire a tutor for 2 sessions. It was $180 per session. Each session was 90 minutes. I did that through LSAT Nerds with Albert. Albert was a great tutor, highly recommend. I think they got a 178 on their LSAT, but ultimately I hired a tutor, which I know can be very expensive and kind of bougie, but because it was my 3rd LSAT, I needed someone to hold me accountable, and honestly needed a cheerleader at that point. I'd been studying throughout all of COVID by myself, you know, and I have really great friends and family, but some of you might be also feeling this way. Going through the LSAT process is so different, like actually being in it than just talking to people about it. So I needed a tutor to ultimately just like hold me accountable, keep me on track, because I only had, I think, 6 to 8 weeks for that final test to study, and I hadn't been studying for months because, like I said, I applied to schools, was hoping that my 167 would be strong enough to get me into some of my programs of choice. I didn't really cram, but we'll get into it. The final resource I have is a Google study sheet, so that's what I used to track and plan all of my drills and tests and practice. That was super helpful for me because if I didn't pre-plan it, honestly, I was working full and part-time while I was studying. I just wouldn't have done it if I didn't already have the test picked out, what sections I was doing, all those types of things. And then I leave a bunch of comments in my Google Sheet, like you'll see if you open it up, tracking which ones I got wrong, what happened, all that type of stuff. And the most important resource in that sheet is the Why I Missed It tab, I found out. We'll get into this when I talk about my tips, but really tracking why I missed different questions or even questions I guessed on and going back and reviewing them untimed, reasoning through it, really helped me see the patterns of the test and get better at it. So yeah, with that, let's get into my 7 tips of the LSAT. Okay, so my first tip is to give yourself time. I know this might sound like a kind of stupid tip, but for me, I am a first-gen professional student, first-gen potential lawyer. I didn't realize how much time I would need for this test. I'm pretty strong in my academics. I've always been a pretty strong test taker. I enjoy them in a weird, masochistic way. Like I see it kind of as like trivia, like how good can I do if this was a trivia game? But I gave myself ultimately like 3.5 months to try and hit that 170 score, when really what I should have done is taken the time, and once I was hitting that score in my practice test, then signed up for the LSAT, rather than signing up for the LSAT, trying to grind for 3.5 months and make it there when I wasn't hitting those scores in my PTs. I think before my first LSAT, the highest score I'd hit was 169. So I was hopeful, but you know, we all know how that turned out. It didn't go as planned. I would say instead of giving yourself, you know, in my case, that 3.5 month timeline, I really wish I had just studied once I had been hitting my goal score in practice that I was looking to hit, then signing up for the test. You know, I would know that I could hit that score pretty easily because I had done it before. So that's kind of my thing. Be flexible on time. You know, for me, I ideally wanted to enroll in fall 2021. I'm taking a whole extra year. And honestly, that extra few months I had to study and retake has significantly improved my score. It'll significantly improve the scholarships I receive because debt is something really heavily on my mind. I've been out of school for, you know, out of undergrad for about 5 years. Treat it as a job. Like I said, I was still working full-time and part-time during my studies, but I planned it out. I scheduled it. I had my like 4-block hour chunk that I would do for 5 days a week, one of those being a practice test, you know, and that might not work for everyone. Be really cognizant of that, but that's just what I did. But I'd say give yourself a good timeline. You don't need to rush. Like law school is going to be there regardless, but the debt you incur, just depending on when you go and with what score, will follow you. It'll take you much more than just 1 year to pay it off. If, you know, I'll probably save like at least $50,000, I think, with my score. And I'm really glad I took those extra few months and the extra year to do that, because it would have taken me who knows how long to pay that off. So. Okay, this is tip number 2. So this has to do with reviewing. So when you're studying for the LSAT, I would say it's quality over quantity. Like I said, I was doing about 4 hours a day when I first started and just like grinding through sections, trying to get as familiar with the test as I can. And that was helpful to a point, but there was really a point when I was just repetitively taking sections and wasn't actually thinking about why I was getting questions wrong or which questions I had guessed on. And I would really say at that point in your review, you need to start taking less questions and really getting into the review of those questions. Like I said, the Why I Missed It tab in that document down below, super helpful. I would track after doing, you know, one LR section. I would mark all the ones that I had not only gotten wrong, but also guessed on, like if I got it down to a 50-50, because if you guessed on it, it was still partially chance. And I really wanted to know why I was getting ones correct and why I was getting them wrong. And then I would go through and I wouldn't look at the correct answers yet for the ones I'd missed or gotten correct. And I would just try to reason through it. You know, I'd look at the stimulus, I'd look at the questions, I'd look at the other answer choices. You know, why did I eliminate certain ones? Was there something in the stimulus that kind of gave away the answer? And those are super important because that process is what helped familiarize me with the different patterns of the test, and I think will be very helpful for you. You know, this is a standardized test at the end of the day, so they have to do things to make it the same each time, and that was just like a big help. I started doing that later into my studying, which honestly I wish I had incorporated earlier, and I think would have saved me a lot of time, which sounds weird because you're not doing as many questions, but the questions you are doing, you're really familiarizing yourself with the patterns and the strategies of the test makers, which I think is really a big part of this test. Like, the test isn't just a content-based test, it kind of is like a psychological warfare, like time management test. So that's something to keep in mind. I would definitely say if you're feeling like you're plateauing, change up the drills you're doing, change up how you're reviewing, start doing those blind reviews, really make sure you're not looking at the answers, and don't go to like PowerScore forums or 7Sage forums until you've really reasoned through it yourself, and then you can then compare your line of reasoning with those forums, which just helps reinforce those concepts. Okay, so tip number 3, it's kind of like a woo tip, you know, like fluffy tip, but it's just don't beat yourself up. Like this test, like I said, is such a grind for many people. Some people, it might be very easy and that's awesome, and hopefully you're not beating yourself up either. But you know, for me, I was studying during COVID, I was doing it on my own, I lived alone. It was just a big time sink. Not a sink, that sounds negative, but it took up a lot of my time. Part of that is just being able to manage your expectations. You know, there'd be days where I'd miss 2 on a section and I felt great, and then the next day I would do a similar section and miss 11, and I thought I was wasting all my time and not learning anything. You know, it's okay. We all have off days. There were some days where it really was just I was fatigued and honestly shouldn't have been studying that day. You know, you should be in the mindset as much as you can of how you're going to take your test. You should really want to be ready to actively engage with reading comp. You should be ready to diagram for logic games. You should know what you're looking for in logical reasoning. So if you're really tired or pissed off or in a bad mood or sick, it just might not go well, and that's okay. You know, maybe do like one game or just keep things up to make yourself feel a little better, because having those little confidence boosts, I would say, are just as important as actually learning the material of the test. Going to the test with confidence, knowing that you can hit your scores, knowing that you know exactly how to set up a game, those small little things will really, really help. As someone who took the test 3 times, I can say, like, by my last test, I wasn't beating myself up at all. I was just ready. I was like, I've done this, let's just do it, let's get it over with. You know, so don't beat yourself up. And tip number 4, this kind of ties in with the last one, but take breaks. You know, like I said at the beginning of my studying, I was really intensely grinding everything out, which was great because I was excited at the time and everything was so novel and I like really wanted to do well. So use that drive, but make sure you use it appropriately and pace yourself. The breaks that I took usually were because I had already taken an LSAT. After my first test, I wasn't studying for those 3 weeks, which is how long it takes usually to get your score back. And so I didn't study for that. That was like kind of a break, except I was so stressed waiting for my score. It didn't really feel relaxing or like a break at all. And then I started studying again for my second LSAT, and I was a little bit better about managing my time and making sure I wasn't burning myself out. You know, doing 4 hours every day was a lot with practice tests every week. Those practice tests, you know, sometimes you're not in the mood to do it. And if you're doing one every week, it's okay to skip a week or a weekend. Enjoy time with your friends, decompress, don't think about the test, because those concepts are still subconsciously ruminating around in your brain. What I found when I did my first practice test, after the months I had taken off because of, you know, applications and waiting to hear back and all those things, I really came back to the test feeling calm, and I knew what I was doing at that point. So it was a much easier transition because I wasn't so in my head like, oh, this is a flaw question, I need to read the prompt, find this, looking for, you know, X, Y, and Z. And I was able to just flow through the test because I knew how to approach it. And so I was focused much more on the stimulus, like what is the author saying, what's the test maker doing, instead of what do I need to be doing as far as a process goes, like read the question, find the conclusion, find the evidence, blah, 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 blah. And I was just flowing through the test much easier. So take those breaks. They're really, really important. It really is like a way to get better at the test. You might feel like you're not doing anything, but managing your time and knowing where you're at mentally is super important for this test. Don't feel bad, you know, don't use it, especially this tip, as like a way to be like, oh, I'm taking a break, mom or dad or myself, like, so I'm good, just because you don't want to study. There's a line, you know, you have to put in the work. But if you've been really grinding it out, you're feeling good, it's okay to ease off a little bit and just maintain your momentum rather than like full sending it every single time. You don't need to do that. It's not sustainable. Take care of yourself. All right, tip number 5, we're over halfway done. So this one is essentially just be honest with yourself. You know, this is a hard test, but the format is standardized and it is the same. When I took it, it was a 3-section flex with no breaks in between. So it was just front to back. And when I was doing my practice test at first, sometimes I'd be like, oh, I really have to use the bathroom. So I'll just like run out for a minute and do that. If you're not allowed to do that on test day, you shouldn't be doing it in your practice. And you have to be upfront with yourself about that. Like, sure, you might be getting like above your goal score or whatnot, but if you're making those small little allowances and you're not taking the test as it is, you're probably not going to be able to do the same on test just because it's not the same environment, it's not the same format. So that's something to keep in mind, and just to be like upfront with yourself. For me, I would even do like, when I took the test, there was about a minute in between. It was like I wanted to make sure I was doing the sections back to back, less than a minute in between, so I could really get through it. And even the morning of, that prep is super important. I wouldn't drink coffee in the morning because I have like the smallest bladder on the planet, TMI, sorry. But I'd always have to use the restroom during the test. So on test day, I wasn't drinking as much coffee. You know, if you're like addicted to coffee or drink it every day, don't change too much from your normal program, but I would sit down through the whole thing, do the whole thing. And so I would just replicate those as much as I could. I only had the test open on my computer. I didn't have other programs running. I didn't have music running. I'd close my door, like my phone was in another room or turned off, like people couldn't distract me. I think that's just super important, because then if you're replicating the actual format of the test, all of your practice scores, you know, you can replicate on test day, right? Like I knew I could hit in the 170s on my third LSAT, because it boosts your confidence a lot more than thinking like, oh, I've never actually hit my score. Like I've never actually done it like front to back. Like maybe I'm not as good as I thought. Like all of those variables are taken out, and it's just doing what you've done before, which honestly is like a really big mental help. So keep that in mind. All right, my tip number 6 is try to bolster your strengths on the test. Not everyone is going to be good at every single section. Going into test day, you know how many you can get wrong in other sections, which really helps. For me, I was essentially trying to get 100% on logic games, which I think is feasible. But even if you're missing 2 to 4, it's like, okay, I know that this is a strength of mine, so I can miss a few more in LR to hit my goal score, or RC to hit my goal score. And that's something I had in mind. I was like, okay, I want to hit 0 to -2 on logic games. So that way it gives me, you know, if I have a really good LR day, then I'm missing maybe 2. If I have a more off RC day, I'm maybe missing 5 or 6 as far as my end score, as far as that ended up, you know. So but I had those in mind, so when I was going through my weaker sections, I was like, oh, I know I can miss 4. I'm not gonna waste time on this question that I'm finding very difficult. I'm gonna move on to the questions that are really easy and get those points, because at the end of the day, each question is just worth 1 point. So get the easy points while you can, manage your time. I think that's super important. And yeah, and then you don't feel as stressed either about the ones that were difficult, because you're like, that's fine. I know I can miss, you know, X amount of questions in this section and hit my goal score, so I don't need to worry about that one. And I can always go back to it at the end after I've gotten all the easy points that really bolster my strengths, or that really capitalize on my strengths, and then I can go back to the ones I'm a little bit weaker at, spend a little bit more time because I have the time, and try and get those points as well. But at the end of the day, you don't need every single question. You don't have to get every single one right. And so really figuring out which ones you're strong in and which ones are weaker in is totally fine, and a really important way, I think, to approach the test. Being as confident as you can, building as much momentum as you can, I think that's a really big part of the test, as well as the mental approach you have. So bolster your strengths, know what those are, know yourself, and you can hit your goal score. Okay, this is my final tip for the test. And like I said, logic games was a strength of mine, but I would say try to get 100% on logic games if you can. I would say a lot of people find the most growth in logic games because it is the most consistent section. If you know how to diagram your formal logic and build out a game, from there, it's just using that diagram, taking the information from the question and filtering it through that. So that is a really, really great way to get those 23 points. And then it sets you up, like I said, if you are weaker in logical reasoning or reading comp, it gives you some more flexibility. But I really think out of all the sections, logic games is probably the one that you can capitalize the most points on, or if you're trying to improve the most points, if logic games is a weaker point for you, I'd say really give it a try. You know, I did say bolster your strengths in the last one. So if logic games really just isn't it, but you're getting 100 on reading comp and LR, totally fine, go for it then, whatever. But I will say, I do think logic games is the most reasonable to get all of those points, because even the games themselves, if they involve sequencing or some overlap, the types of answers you're getting are also a lot more consistent than reading comp or logical reasoning. So those are it. So yeah, those are my 7 tips. I hope that they were really helpful. If you have more questions or these tips maybe leave some things out, please put it in the comments. I would love to update the document and have it be a breathing thing that can really help out future students. You know, like I said, I learned a lot over this last year about myself, about the test. Like, I've never studied so long or so hard for a test in my life. I think I ended up at over, you know, we can go through those resources. I think I ended up at over 500 hours studying for this test, which is insane. Like in college, I never, like, you know, it's a semester long. I never had to study for a test for a year like this. Take the time you need, do quality review over just a bunch of repetition. Don't beat yourself up all the time like it's a hard test. Take breaks, be honest with your practice, focus on your strengths, and try to get 100% on logic games. So if you want to make copies of the documents in there, please don't edit mine, and I don't think anyone has edit access to them, but you can make a copy to your own Google Drive, wipe out all of my stuff and just use it as a template. I highly recommend that. Go for it. Hopefully your LSAT goes really well. I hope that it's a smooth process for you, and best of luck. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, give it a thumbs up. I'd love to hit 100 subscribers so I can just change my URL name on here. Tyler from the future back again. So we already hit 100 subscribers. Thank you guys so much. The updated URL is now not 20,000 characters long, so that's super nice. It's just Tyler J. Henry. So thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. I'll be posting other LSAT content and tips and vlogs. I'm also hoping to tour some schools now that I have my score, and I can bring you along with that, because I know during COVID, I don't even know what those tours are going to look like, honestly. So hopefully they'll be helpful. If you can't fly out somewhere, you know, I don't even know if I'll be able to fly out depending on the price. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. But more to come. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you, and let's be the next generation of really awesome lawyers who care about people. I'll see you in the next one.